Hello, great to have you all with us today. I'm Guillaume Montard, Head of Product at CISO. We're jumping straight into one of the most polarizing topics of the year, AI governance playbook. Ultimately, what are the differences between leaders and laggards? We all know the reality, the pace of AI adoption isn't waiting for security teams to catch up. The laggards are paralyzed by risk, trying to block the tide, or worse, they're completely blind to AI already sprawling across their SDLC. On the other end, the leaders are figuring out how to enable that velocity while building the guardrails that actually hold up. To help us distinguish the signal from the noise, I'm joined by three heavy hitters who are living this daily. Let me introduce you to Rinky Sethi, Chief Security and Strategy Officer at Upwind, Daniel Heriford, Chief Information Officer and CISO at Intermex, and Chris Peterson, CISO at Unity. Starting with you, Rinky, can each of you give us a short 15-second introduction to give our audience some background on your experience?
Very nice to be here. I'm Rinky Sethi. I'm the Chief Security Officer at Upwind. Been in cybersecurity for a little over 22 years now. Worked at companies like Pacific Gas and Electric, Walmart, eBay, Intuit, Palo Alto Networks, and the list goes on. Very nice to be here.
Thank you, Rinky. Daniel?
Thank you. Also very glad to be here today. My name is Daniel Herford. I'm currently serving as the CIO and CISO for Intermex, and I've been in this field, mostly in financial services. I've been the CIO or the CISO of 4 regional banks here in the United States. So I've worked primarily in the financial services industry. Very glad to be here and share my experience and learn from my colleagues here.
Thank you, Daniel. Chris?
Yeah, I'm happy to be here as well. My name is Chris Peterson. I'm currently the CISO at Unity. I've been in security for 30 years. Companies such as Microsoft, Facebook, Dropbox, LinkedIn, and some of that in the gaming industry, which is where I ended up now. Excited for the conversation we're going to have.
Thank you, all of you, being here. Now, since we have just a few minutes today, we're going to go straight into Playbook questions. And I want to start to dive in and ask you, Rinky, the first one, because I think you have like a unique vantage point from all of us here, from being both in the CISO seat and as well as like the modern security vendor side. So ultimately, when you look at an organization AI posture today, what is like the single big red flag that immediately signals to you, well, that organization is clearly behind the curve? What are the kind of those signals for you?
I think the biggest red flag when I think about it is that, like, if I look at an organization that talks about AI governance, and I think many of us may have been part of those type of conversations as well, is when it's almost entirely at the policy level, but the organization can't demonstrate how the policy shows up technically and in real environments. So you know that they probably got a AI governance committee and that they have all these standards, but it's not actually implemented. And if you ask where AI is being used in the organization, what models are running, what data they touch, how outputs are validated, then the answers a lot of times that you get is very vague or incomplete. And that tells me that the organization is already behind. What worries me the most is the mismatch between speed and visibility. Developers and business teams are adopting AI faster than security teams can observe it. And that creates a real false sense of control. And even though policies exist, approvals exist, there's no continuous way of having insight and into how AI behaves once it's deployed. So in practice, I think that means that sensitive data may already be flowing into prompts, training loops, et cetera. And there's potential, there's actual real risk. It's not theoretical, and it might already be material.
So like almost like a false sense of like, we're good, we've got policies, but realistically when you start to like dig deeper, nothing.
Exactly. Yeah. You start looking at things and you're seeing that we actually don't even have the visibility.
Interesting. Talking about friction and addressing this one to you, Chris, there's definitely a massive tension between like the innovation and the pace of the velocity that we're all kind of asking for and the control. We all feel it. And traditionally, we've been using like zero trust model that actually are great and work well. But AI basically break that because by design, AI needs to operate with vast amount of data. So how do you govern this without becoming basically the no person or the no department? Where do you have, or did you have to, because you probably already started, kind of adapting your policies because that old playbook just doesn't work in that new paradigm?
Yeah, I mean, one of the philosophies I've had and that I'm certainly building here at Unity is this idea that security isn't known as the team of no, but we're yes, and here's how. And one of the ways we've been thinking about AI is it does require access to data, and I think the typical model in the past has been long-lived, persistent access to this data. That with AI, there's a lot of concern about what happens with that data over time. And so what we've been trying to do is really get crisp about three basic questions that we ask the teams. The first is, do they have a defined purpose for what they're trying to build the model for? And really being able to describe that to us clearly, rather than, some of the unbounded, well, there's a lot of different things we'd like to do. I think by just getting them to define that purpose ahead of time really helps us to understand the risks that they're going to be exposing to the company. The second is, that we've had many teams come forward with project ideas and research ideas that, we're going to just pull in all the data we can find, just pull everything in, and then we'll see what we can do with it. And instead, what we've said is we want them to really get crisp about what is the bounded data set that they really need access to based on that defined purpose that they have for it, and understanding that they really only need access to that data for some constrained period of time. It's just during the training cycle when they're pulling this data in. They don't need persistent access to these data stores, and I think that helps us also control the exposure. And then finally, when we look at what is the potential bad outcomes that can occur, it really has to do with where the outputs are going to end up going. And so getting them to, in advance, really define an explicit output plan so that we know what the blast radius is if something goes wrong. And I think this has helped us create a conversation with the teams that really kind of forces them to think it through a little bit ahead of time, but allows us to then, do a better job more quickly and more successfully in understanding that and giving them the ability to move forward and do the kinds of things that they want to do. So, a big part of this is the visibility that we have into what they're trying to do. So, yes, fast is allowed, move fast, but blind is not allowed. You're going to have to let us have visibility into what you're trying to do, what you're going to use to do it, and then what you're going to do with the outputs.
Very interesting. Like, it sounds like you really got that framework with like three simple questions at the end of the day, and balancing like ultimately the risk, but also forcing people to not go into like, oh, AI, I need data, so I need access to everything. Like, think about it more carefully, but balance it with ultimately the output. Where is it going? So we can balance the risk. Super interesting. Daniel, you have something to add to that?
Yeah, maybe just an anecdote from my experience to kind of demonstrate what Chris is talking about. Obviously, all of us have been in this for 20 plus years, and we've really seen a shift, right, at how fast the expectation has moved in terms of adopting new and emerging technologies. I mean, we've probably all run the gamut of, hey, we'll be late adopters and wait till the regulations come out and sort of block everything by default. And that's really shifted to enablement and being able to move quickly. And Chris, and it was something Rinky said as well about the policy. Something funny that's going on right now with us is we know we need to control, we need to manage everything you guys just said. But, it's funny. No one wants to be the bad guy. It's so consumerized. It's so popular. It's so talked about in news cycles and just everywhere, social media. So it is kind of an interesting battle in your organization. I've got some people saying, Daniel, write a policy, because then we have something to, then we have a reason to say don't or how. Chris, like you said, not just no, but how. And then you've got other people saying, don't write a policy, just start controlling or just start monitoring. So I think it's interesting. I don't know that there's an answer except to say, I think another thing that's really changed in the CISO role in the last 20 years is we've got to have that person. We've got to think about the humans behind this problem. We have to recognize our organization, recognize who's going to be those people, who's going to participate in that conversation, And I think it's an opportunity for us to be leaders. We have to lead the conversation. So it's kind of this moment. You can't be scared to say something, and you need to kind of try to walk this balance line that Chris and Rinky are talking about. I think it's really fascinating to see that playing out in everyone's business.
Yeah, if I can chime in on that, it's so interesting that you bring it up in that way because I do feel like we've tried to push data governance and all these other things. From all of these things, AI is the one that's like, leaders are coming to us, right? And they're like, I'm kind of fearful. Can you help us here? And it's actually bridging that kind of gap that's
I think to echo that, I think you're right. I think there's a fearfulness, and I think this is actually one of the key aspects of the risks associated with this is that people see this huge opportunity with AI, but I think a lot of the engineering leaders that I'm dealing with, they don't really fully understand all of the components of that and what it really means and how it's, what kinds of systems they're going to have to interact with in order to take advantage of it. And so they're just less confident about their own understanding of it. And that leads them to, yes, they do come and ask questions, but it also means many of them are trying to implement things just for the sake of doing it without really understanding, does this make sense or not? Is this really an important thing that we should be doing? Or is it just, hey, let's try everything we can possibly do with this thing because we don't really understand what it can do, but we'll figure it out as we go. And I think that leads to some of the, this trying to simplify the model on my side to say, all right, yes, I understand that, let's do it. But let's make sure you know what you're trying to achieve and helping them to really understand what they're doing with this technology before they go rushing out and throwing things together.
Adding to that, Chris, do you think the reason for that is like because there's a big push from above, basically, you have to use AI, we cannot actually forget about AI, this is basically the revolution and we need to invest? Or is it also like a personal willingness, like from like more bottom up, like this sounds amazing, we hear about it every day, we want to use it, we don't really know what to do with it, but we want to use it and let's use it?
I mean, I think it's a combination of these things. I think there's definitely some members of my leadership team who are just like, hey, all the people in the C-suites and other companies that I'm talking to are raving about what the benefits they're getting from AI, and we've got to try it out too. And others are just, hey, we're trying to control spending, and this seems like a really great way to be a multiplier on what we can achieve, the productivity of our teams. And then I think others are just, wow, this is exciting and it's new and we've got to be part of the wave. So I think it's coming from a lot of different directions, but the end result is the level of enthusiasm and the level of desire to move fast is intense. And in some ways, I think even throwing caution to the wind in many cases, people who don't understand it, and there are people coming and asking, but others are just like, give it to us now. We want everything. We want it all. We want everything we can do. We just want to get everything we can out of it.
Well, actually, digging into this, and for you, Daniel, I think it's an interesting one. Is like we often, and we've been talking about shadow IT for many, many years. Now we're talking about shadow AI, obviously. But this one feels kind of a bit different because like AI is basically pretty deep in your SDLC already, and in your developers workflow. So when you look at your environments, where are the blind spots that basically scare you the most? Is it like in your code, the plugins, the coding assistant? Is it just about in general data exiting your perimeters, maybe through MCP server? Like which part like actually scare you the most?
So this is a fascinating topic, and I like the word you used and chose there, that it feels different. And I really agree with that. That really resonates with me, that shadow IT might be a few tools that people use to do very specific things in their job. And as you said, we've fought that. But AI, especially when you're talking about development, it's starting to really influence not just like a tool they use, but it's the way they think and it's the way they work. And it's the first thing they open instead of the last or somewhere in the sequence. And again, it's fascinating how fast that has happened. So I think, I'll be honest, I think all the things you mentioned are, I don't think any CISO would say they're not scary. And I'm sure each one poses individual risks depending on the nature of your company. For me, the code generation and the provenance behind the code that's being generated by AI, to me, that may just be in my environment, but that's the part to me that I think it's the most scary, to use your word, because it's the most unknown. We have a lot of tools to do code checks, and I'm sure everyone does, but I think it needs to be reminded that generally those tools check syntax and patterns and rules. They do not check intent or context or origin or intent, right? They're not tools. So the reality is, you might be reviewing with a bot a piece of code that was written by a bot. And when we hang sort of all of our confidence on that, it's a unique situation where we're maybe trusting these tools implicitly way more than we ever have trusted many tools that we have used for years. We don't maybe trust that much. So, and we don't typically have checks on that. So that's a really, to me, that's the part that is, again, back to Chris's point, I think you said it, it's such a time saver. Hey, we've kind of said, hey, maybe 40 to 50% of your new code should be AI written at first, at least the first draft or the outline or the first part of it. So we're challenging people to think that way, but then again, we are a little scared. And again, the other things you mentioned, IDE plugins, obviously, we want people to use them. They help people do things, but all the things, right? Where's our code going? What part is being shared? Has that been vetted through any of our traditional processes? And the answer, of course, is going to be, you should assume it's a no, right? Everyone should assume that no, it hasn't been, it's going to be. So it really changes the paradigm of, I just really think that I think we all would probably say we have a set of approved IDE plugins. I think we would all hope to say that. But the reality is, if you're literally going to block everything that's not on that list, you're already causing that friction. And the reality is, there are more than ever ways to get around that. So it's not the tightest control that you think it is. And I think communicating it as a solid control might be a little risky. So I'm all about transparency as a CISO, and really identifying those areas. So again, I'm being very communicative about these issues, talking about where I think we have gaps, and of course, trying as best I can to continue to close those gaps. But you're right, it does feel different. There's shades of it. If you have good things that can detect shadow IT, then you probably have the framework of processes and thought processes or even technical processes to maybe detect some of this activity. But again, if you're like us and you use contractors or third parties, it kind of gets exponentially complicated to try to detect that code usage and that AI.
No, exactly, and I think you have multiple level of inference, because, like you said, like if for you what you're the most worried about is the code, like which part is actually generated by an AI, but at the end it's code. So how do you distinguish something generated by an AI versus like a human person? It's way more difficult to understand than just a tool that is there because, okay, we didn't approve this tool, we see this tool. That's pretty easy in comparison, I guess. Chris, you wanted to add to this?
Yeah, I was going to say, I agree with everything that Daniel said. I think that's exactly some of the things that we've been struggling with as well. Two areas related to this that do concern me a lot. One is that we've got a growing corpus of data from what we've been able to gather inside Unity that indicates that the quality of the code that's being generated by AI is at best equal to an average engineer's code quality. And so I think there's this perception among, especially some of our engineering leaders, that AI generated code is higher quality and therefore it's more desirable. And that's not what our data is telling us. And so, I'm concerned about the increased use of these AI assistants and IDE plugins is resulting in a inherent blind spot amongst our engineering teams about what that's actually doing to our code quality. And security issues in particular, we've found that there's no fewer security issues in the AI assisted or generated code than there is in non-assisted code. So, these models are trained on real engineers' code, and real engineers make mistakes. And so the AI is making some of those same mistakes. I think that will get better over time. But another area that concerns us a lot is, the shadow AI thing related to this is that our engineers are so excited about what this does for the amount of code they can generate and their own perception that it improves the quality of their code. And so even beyond what we're allowing, we've got many of them bringing their own, we call it the leaky bucket. We've got, many other AI systems just being introduced into our environment. Some that we actually have licensed for enterprise use, but they bring in their own personal licenses. And the leakage of IP through prompts is an area that is something that my team is really spending a lot of time trying to build a strategy around, because that really concerns us a lot. We're in a very competitive environment, the industry that my company is in, and that IP leakage is a significant threat to the company. It's a risk that the company really needs to be concerned about, and it's happening right now. We know it's happening, and we really don't have yet a really solid strategy for how we're going to address that.
Super interesting. Let's shift a little bit on the supply chain aspect, because so far we've talked about like what we build internally. All of us here are building software essentially, but we are also buying software. So when a vendor comes to you with an AI powered feature, like basically we do at CISO, for instance, what is kind of your like litmus test for approval? Do you think we're moving toward like having some kind of like bill of material for AI? Do you think it's needed? Like, what's like your reasoning regarding risk, like for those software that you're buying and that are utilizing AI? Maybe Rinky?
Yeah, definitely. And I think Chris and Daniel mentioned it as well. But it's like the first question is not about just accuracy and productivity gains. It's about transparency. And like as security leaders, that's the first thing that we need to clarify with the vendor. And it's what model are you using? Where did it come from? What data are you using to train it? What customer data does it see at inference time? And how prompts and outputs are logged, stored, governed, et cetera. And if a vendor can't clearly answer these questions, it's a real red flag on like, even if the feature is super compelling, like what's the risk that I'm going to be taking in order to get this really cool feature? And I think traditional security questionnaires were not built to capture this AI specific risk. And when you think about just like third party risk and like supply chain, it's just that whole I would say that whole space is changing so much because you need active monitoring as well with the way that tech is changing. And a lot of the questionnaires that we use to assess security risk doesn't always clearly apply to AI. It misses like model behavior and data lineage and a lot of these things. And so we are moving towards an AI bill of materials. And I think that today, when I think about most companies and where they are, there's definitely a gap between what buyers assume that vendors are doing and what they actually disclose and where the gaps and risks hide. And I think a lot of times it's not about it's not just about transparency, but it's also like the same things we talked about earlier around, do we all have visibility? Do we actually know things are changing so fast that how do we stay on top of that? And so I think definitely an AI bill of materials and asking the vendors these tough questions, but then also think about like, how can we technically solve this internally? Because there are security companies that are helping solve this as well. And how do you ongoing monitor that third-party security risk?
Danielle?
Just want to add to that. That's perfectly on point. I think the real key message really for all of this is governance is lagging behind behavior pretty much everywhere, right? So Rinky just said the same. I mean, we all know from vendor questionnaires, we've been asking, where do you store your data, right? Generally that's about their data center or the cloud providers they were using, right? And now to that point, it needs to extend to AI. But I guess I want to say back to the transparency comment is, unlike when I'm doing that or when my teams are doing that for well-established vendors or cloud or something a little more, again, I try to be very transparent and I try to lead with the message of, hey guys, they probably don't fully know every piece of AI that's in their environment yet. I just think there needs to be a risk recognition, in my opinion, that where we are right now, governance across the board for AI is clearly lagging the velocity of the adaptation. So again, I agree. Add it to your questionnaire. Ask those questions. Make them ask. I agree with Rinky. If you're talking to someone and they're like, I gotta think about that. Well, again, it's your company, it's your risk, it's your data. You got to make that risk decision. But if those conversations aren't happening, you are definitely lagging behind. You definitely need to add that to your questionnaire or at least to your thought process. Couldn't agree more, Rinky.
You want to add anything to that, Chris?
Yeah, I think it's maybe a little piece of optimism about this, and that is that, as you look back at the governance models that we've had to establish in the industry for various areas, data governance and the software, quality security governance that we've established. Those took years to get to the point where, as the industry, we came together and realized, or some regulatory agency or government put something over there to just deal with the fact that we weren't paying attention to it. What I'm seeing right now is everybody is concerned about governance of AI systems. It comes up in conversations with the legal department, in security. We see it being talked about externally. Governments, the EU has already passed laws. There's other, states in the United States already talking about this. Everybody is thinking about it. And it's because we're learning from all of the mistakes we made in the past. And we're getting ahead of this curve, so as fast as AI is moving, I feel like the wave of governance is moving just as quickly behind it. So I'm somewhat optimistic about where we are and what the industry is going to do, what the world is going to do about this.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. So what you're saying is basically like we're moving very, very fast for once from the governance or and the compliance standpoint, though AI is moving so fast that it feels like we're still behind a little bit, but at the end of the day, not that
Right.
much.
That's kind of how I look at it.
Very, very interesting. Well, now at time, so I'd like to close this panel, but to close it well, I'd like one sentence from each of you to help like our fellow security leaders that are listening to us and maybe feel like they're lagging. So what is basically the single most high impact action that they could take tomorrow morning to start to catch up? Starting with you, Chris.
So I feel like the key to AI is the data that it has access to and that gets manipulated by it. And I think anybody in a job like ours, if they sat down tomorrow morning and just mapped out what are all the sensitive data sources within their organization, how are they interconnected with each other, and then share that with their engineering teams, with their product teams, and get them to start thinking about it, you would go from having this sort of intangible fear about what AI could do to actually starting to put together a pretty prioritized list of what are the things you really need to be focused on and how that interacts with AI. And I think that alone could give your organization a greater sense of comfort and a greater sense of focus.
Rinky?
Yeah, I like nailed what I was about to say too, but I think visibility reduces fear, but then you do have to do the mapping, and that's what is gonna help you drive action. But at least start with visibility right away. Like, don't feel like you don't know what's going on in your environment, because that causes fear on its own. And so at least get that contained, that you know what's in your own environment to begin with.
There you go.
Not surprisingly, my message would be the same. If I was going to do something tomorrow morning and I felt like I was lagging, it would be to create a process to start creating visibility before I even started to enforce control. And I know that again, every company is a little different. Every risk tolerance is different, but not only visibility of the data, which my two colleagues here covered exceptionally well, but just visibility of the tools that are being used. If you can match the data and the sensitive things you have and the tools that are being used, whether they're sanctioned or not, don't worry about that right now. I say don't worry, but I hope you take my meaning. Like, you can't put every fire out at the same time. So get the visibility on the data, combine it with visibility of the sanctioned and unsanctioned tools. That creates transparency. You can have an informed conversation. Then you can start taking risk-based, actionable control things that will actually move the bar forward and not just create meaningless friction. So I think we're all on the same page. It sounds like that visibility is step one, and do it. That's what I would do first thing.
100%. So visibility, like we've already, policy and enforcement ultimately. I think that's the message of what's your roadmap for becoming a leader for everyone listening to us. Winky, Daniel, Chris, I want to thank you so much for being transparent about those challenges and the discussion. I think we could have gone on for another hour on that topic. It's a pretty interesting one, and obviously there's a lot to do. That was I would say a masterclass in AI governance, and thank you so much. Thank you for watching also, everyone. We have obviously a lot more today. I will pass things back to Monica so she can take us to the next session. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.